All right, and welcome to another webinar today, everyone. We have our last weekly leadership session with our Princess K program, and I'm really excited to be welcoming today Megan Anderson and Brianna Welke with Belmont Partners. Never before in the Princess K program, especially the leadership sessions, have we really talked about media. And this is going to be a great opportunity to learn more about how to present yourself, what are your talking points, and just learn more in-depth information about media interviews and how you can be prepared to share your dairy story. Before we begin, I just want to remind everybody, you guys are all pros at this now, but remember, use the question and answer box or the chat box if you guys have questions, and send them our way. And as a final reminder, we do have a pop-up survey that will happen at the end, so don't close your web browser. But again, if you have questions, comments, use that chat or question in the answer box, and we'll make sure we ask both Megan and Brianna. So without any further ado, ladies, I'll turn it over to you, and welcome to today's session.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jenna, and good afternoon, everyone. We are honored to be here with you to talk a little bit about media training and give you some tips and tricks for handling those media interviews. So we'll just dive on in. So yeah, why are we here today? We just want to help you guys gain a better understanding of the media, get comfortable with the different types of media interviews you might experience, and give you an overview of what to expect and give you some keys for practicing, because practicing is really key in helping nail those interviews, we will say. We'll also answer any questions that you may have, so feel free to put them into the chat. We can stop during it, or we'll be sure to save time at the end for any questions. So we will get going, but first we want to introduce ourselves quickly. So as Jenna said, I'm Megan Anderson with Belmont Partners. I've been with Belmont for coming up on 9 years. And that whole time I have been working with the Princess K program, specifically out at the State Fair. And I love it. It's one of our favorite projects of the year to work on. State Fair time, there are lots of media interviews for Princess K and the finalists, and we'll get to more of that later. But in addition to Princess K, I work with Midwest Dairy throughout the year. I also lead our travel and tourism practice group, working with the Uptown Association on the Uptown Art Fair, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We've also worked with Explore Minnesota. So I really love telling the stories of Minnesotans and its people and its dairy farmers. So the Princess program is a really great way for us to do that. So, and I'll turn it over to Brianna.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Brianna Welke. I'm the Director of Brand Strategy at Belmont Partners. And like Megan said, I've been working with Midwest Dairy and the Princess K program for a little over 5 years now, and also work on other projects within Midwest Dairy as well, and several of the same types of clients that Megan mentioned. And again, really, we love, like Megan said, helping people tell their stories, especially of Minnesota brands and iconic programs like the Princess K of the Milky Way. So we're really excited to kind of dig in and help you guys navigate how to do media interviews and really tell your story.
For sure. So just talking about your role as a dairy advocate, you're really great representatives of your communities and fellow dairy farmers. So, sharing your stories and your shared values will really help you connect, not just with the reporter, but the audiences that are watching these media interviews. So we'll talk more about that, but your role as a dairy advocate on here, just be incredible, knowledgeable, relatable, available, passionate, and enthusiastic. And let your love of dairy and dairy farming shine through in these interviews, and that's really key. So why work with the media? Why is it important? Media provides an extremely credible source. That third-party credibility really goes a long way, for people who are wanting to learn more about dairy farming and dairy products. It also increases visibility. There's lots of things going on in this world today. So when you're able to break through that clutter and have these media interviews and be able to share your story, that really helps you stand out in a crowded marketplace. Also building trust, sharing your personality and your dairy story, that will help build trust, like we said, and create those relationships for people to really increase their love of dairy and dairy farming and learn more. And reach fans, opinion leaders, influencers, and decision makers to help ultimately drive those dairy sales, which is key. And and once you build those trusts with reporters and the media, that will help you down the road. They'll come back to you and learn more, and you can gain more coverage down the road. So it's just a great way to build relationships all over the board. So as we mentioned, we work a lot with Princess K and the finalists out at the state fair. And let me tell you, media love Princess K and the finalists. She averages about 30 interviews during the 12 days of the state fair, and most of those are done on day 1 or day 2. A lot of them before 9 a.m. I think when she goes into the butter booth that first day, she has about 10 media interviews under her belt, starting at 5 a.m. out at the front gates, day 1 at the state fair. So it's pretty much go, go, go. And we're there to, bring her to the interviews and help her guide her through all of that, because it's a busy but fun day. And it's media from all over. It's ag media, it's consumer media, all 4 local TV stations are out there, and then media outlets from all over the state, all over the country and the world. We've had news teams from Germany, the Netherlands, the UK come out and want to talk about Princess K and the butter sculptures. They just find it so fascinating and interesting that this is a program. So it really resonates with media all over the world. And even when there isn't a fair, in 2020, we still coordinated more than 20 interviews for Princess K over those 2 weeks of when they had the closed butter sculpting. So that was a great way to still share dairy story without the kind of the noise of the state fair and everything else going on. So it really resonates with the media. And, along with Princess K, the finalists are often interviewed with her. They're right alongside with her that first day. They're often asked where they're from and their names and about their farms. So it's important that the finalists and Princess K are all media trained and ready to take on these interviews. And a lot of time the finalists are interviewed solo by their hometown media outlets as well. So in 2020, we had more than 1,000 media clips and a total potential audience of more than 709 million people. So it's a big deal and people love it. So it's great. So then who are the media? So just wanted to give you a little overview. They're really just looking for a good story to tell and have a conversation with you. They're a trained observer and listener. They have deadlines that are real and inflexible. So that goes back to that availability point. If you can be there and be that source for them when they need it, that is perfect. They're requiring quotes, examples, color, and just the personality for stories. So that's your role too, to just be that enthusiastic dairy advocate. While they're looking not to throw you curveballs or anything usually, but it's not their job to ask questions that you want them to ask you, or interpret information that you think they should, or rewrite a bad quote into a good one. So that's really important, why it's key to practice and get your key messages down and learn how to bridge away from difficult questions, which we'll talk about more later. Good. So the different types of interviews that we help coordinate, that are the main ones here, are radio or podcast interviews. Those are a little bit longer format, about 10 to 15 minutes. If they're recorded, 2 to 3 minutes if they're live on air. Those are nice since you don't typically see your face and you can have your notes handy. The television interviews, on the other hand, usually highly visible, very quick. Don't have your notes handy there. You kind of have to internalize your key messages, and talk in sound bites, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then print and online interviews. So again, nice that it's typically, you don't see your face, can have your notes, vary in timing, usually about 15 to 30 minutes. So radio and podcast interviews, those are typically done via the phone. Sometimes now they are done via Zoom if they want to grab that recording or put anything online. So just be sure to ask what format that you'll be doing ahead of the interviews. When you're calling in, be sure to go to a quiet room with good reception without distractions. That is key. I know dogs barking or kids or anyone in the background can be distracting. So really go to a quiet space and make sure that you'll be able to hear them and they'll be able to hear you. Because that's really key for a radio and podcast interview. It's just your voice. So you really want to speak slowly. You want to have a good conversation and really put your best foot forward there. And paint a picture with your words and have examples and stories ready that you can share. And also goes without saying, but never chew gum or chew food during an interview, radio interview, because that's what they're hearing is your voice. So you want it to be as clear and concise as possible. Television interviews. So those are, usually either live or taped. So you can ask ahead of time what that will be, because that will really determine how you handle that. And those are usually pretty quick, especially live. They're usually only 2 to 3 minutes. So that's important to have your key messages internalized, have those conversations and talk in sound bites. You really want to get your points across quickly versus having kind of those longer form conversations with radio. If you're in studio or on site somewhere, you definitely want to look at the interviewer and not at the camera. That can be very distracting when people look right at the camera during TV interviews. So just pretend you're having a conversation with the reporter and that the camera's not even there. But on the other hand, during this virtual time, if you are doing a Zoom interview, you will want to look directly into the camera, since that's a little bit different format. Again, sit up straight and look slightly forward, be engaged. Paint your picture, have those examples and stories ready. That's really key. That's the line that goes through all these interviews. And dress appropriately. No loud, clunky jewelry or distracting patterns. Sometimes you'll see people with stripes on with TV or a busy pattern, and it like blurs the screen. So we usually recommend that our clients wear solid, like jewel tone colors, or just things that won't be too distracting. And I know this is, everyone has these, but be aware of your vocal tics or words that you use, such as and it really helps to practice in front of a mirror or record yourself answering some questions, so you can kind of flag those tics and work on not using them as much. So everyone does it, but again, the more you practice, the more you're aware of it, the better you'll get. And then print and online interviews, kind of the same thing. You'll be able to have your key messages. You can bring notes, bring some examples, and then whether it's on the phone or in person, everything you say is always on the record. And I will say that goes for all the media interviews as well. If you're backstage at the TV station waiting to go on and you're chatting with the producer or anyone like that, just know that you're always on the record. You're always being a representative of the dairy community. And yes, anytime you're dealing with media, everything is on the record.
And Megan, we have a quick question about defining a soundbite and what that is.
Yes, good question. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in key messages, but a soundbite is really just getting your point across in as few words as possible. Something that could be kind of pulled for a quote, and really get your point across without having a kind of a long and drawn out answer. I don't know, Brianna, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, or in a newspaper, that one thing that they leave in a quote, or maybe they pull it out as a headline. It's a really compelling short statement.
Mm-hmm.
And so thinking through, if the reporter or my audience only remembers or hears one thing,
Mm-hmm.
what is that one thing I would want to say? And that really is your soundbite. And the stronger it is, the more likely it'll get used in a media interview versus trimmed out in the editing as well. So we'll get a little bit into that in the next session of how you can do that, or make sure you're getting across those sound bites. But that's a really good question, is thinking through what is it exactly you want to get across.
Right. Yeah, great question. And speaking of key messages, we will get into that section now. So I will hand it over to Brianna.
Yeah, that's a great lead into this section. You can go to the next slide here. So key messages are, in short, your sound bites. If you look at it at a very high level, your intended audience in an interview is only going to take away a few things, no matter if it's a print piece that's long or a short TV interview. They're only going to remember certain details of it. So you really want to make those details count. And that's really where your key messages or your sound bites come in. Thinking through what are the most important things we want to get across in this interview. In all interviews, we always say repetition is a good thing. When you have those messages that you want to get across, it's good to repeat them or reinforce them when it makes sense and when it's natural. We never want to sound like a broken record where we're just saying the same thing over and over. But when you see an opportunity to repeat something that's very important, always do that, whether that, again, no matter what kind of interview that is. And as Megan kind of touched on as she was talking earlier, we like to tell people to internalize your key messages or what you want to say and don't memorize. It will sound more natural, more convincing, and it just comes off a little more authentic in the interview. So as you're thinking through, as you're talking about the Princess K program and the dairy industry and the great work that you do, put those in your own words. And again, that will just sound more natural and more convincing. And to be honest, it'll be more comfortable for you as well as the interviewee. So when we go over some key messages, again, it's important just to kind of take them for what they are, but then put them in your own words. These are kind of, some of these are obvious, but they're good reminders, is that key messages should always be true and they should be brief. Again, that kind of gets back to the soundbite thing. There's so many great stories to tell that we could sit and talk all day about all the work that you do as PK and the dairy industry, but we want them to be brief so they get included in the interview or the article. And to speak to your audience. So if you're doing a TV interview that's a very consumer facing audience, you'll want to deliver messages that would be important to them, versus if maybe you're on an ag radio station, the interview might be a little different and you might have some different questions. So just knowing who your audience is when you go into the interview will help you with that. Again, being flexible enough to say them in your own words. This is, again, so you don't sound like a robot or a broken record of just repeating something you memorized, but it does sound authentic and true to who you are and how you speak. And then, of course, whenever it's appropriate, we love when you can incorporate as a key message a specific call to action, such as come and see us at the Breakfast in the Farm event on this date, or learn more about dairy farming and nutrition by visiting midwestdairy.com. Or, of course, if we're at the state fair, the call out to come to the dairy building. So thinking through what that call to action could be to get people to do more, to learn more after your interview. Again, practice makes perfect. So we can't say that enough. The more you practice, the easier it's going to be to use your key messages during interview, because it'll just become second nature to you. You won't even have to think about it because you'll have it, again, internalized. Always use key messages to the best of your ability to answer the reporter's questions. If the message doesn't obviously answer a question that a reporter asks, we always recommend to give a brief answer to acknowledge that you've heard the question and you're answering it, and then bridge back to an appropriate key message. And we'll get a little bit into what a bridge means and how you do that in the coming slides. But again, you want to make sure that you're being open and transparent and asking questions, but then you can always get back to a key message. And as Megan mentioned, just infuse your energy, your passion, and your personality into each response, again, to just make it a really authentic, positive interview. And tell your story. That's what the media wants to hear. That's what your audience wants to hear, is what everything means to you as a dairy farmer, as a dairy princess. What do you do on your farm that could reinforce one of the messages you want to get across about what the dairy industry is doing? Sharing your favorite recipes for things that incorporate dairy, or making it, answering a question with something that's personal to you. Again, it's that authentic voice, and it comes across really natural and great in an interview, and leaves people wanting to learn more. Those personal stories are so interesting and why they want to talk to you in the first place. So always tell your story and be true to who you are as you're answering reporters' questions.
Yeah, and I just say, I love this photo. This is Rebecca Paskowitz a few years ago, right after she was crowned. And this just kind of paints a picture in one picture about the media attention that Princess K gets. So, I mean, these were cameras, these were ag mags, these were local TV station. It was just everyone grouped together to get her first words as Princess K. So this is just always a favorite photo of mine to share.
Yep. Bridging. Okay, so earlier I mentioned bridging back to a key message if you're asked a question that maybe is a little off topic, or you don't have a natural message that you've internalized that you could use for it. Bridging is a great way to kind of answer those questions and get the interview back on topic to what you do want to talk about. So this allows you to really reinforce those key message. And it's really something that once you get more practice, again, it becomes really natural. And again, it allows you to answer a question directly, but then kind of transition or bridge back to what you really want to talk about in some of your key messaging. So what does that look like? if you watch news or interviews, or you read interviews, or see people on TV doing this, if you start paying attention, you'll see it happen a lot often. But they'll use things, and bridging techniques are using things like, I can't speak to that, but what I do know is, and this is great if they ask you something that you don't know the answer to, or if it's something you're not comfortable answering. You can say, I acknowledge that you've asked that question. I can't really speak to that, but what I do know is that, as a dairy ambassador, we believe in this, or as a dairy farmer, we do this. Good question. But another one is, and that's kind of, again, another way to get around maybe a tougher question, or a question that has incorrect information that you don't want to talk about. That's right. And we can also remember that, and that's a good time to reinforce something that's very important for the audience to know. These next ones on here are ones, and this is going to be very, very rare, if ever happen, that you get asked something that is negative, or maybe they're digging for something that you're just not comfortable asking. Great things to say is, let me put that another way, and reinforce it with a key message about what you're doing, about the dairy industry, about dairy farming. Or let me put that in perspective to you. That might seem like a big number, but in reality, this. Or I'd also like to point out that, and that's another great way to deliver a message. And yes, but the one thing I consider important is, and then deliver your key message. So they're kind of those transitional phrases that allow you to address the question, not really answer it in a polite way, but then get back to what you really want to talk about and take back control of the interview. And that's the same with handling mistakes. We all make them. We're human. They're going to happen from time to time. And if you make a mistake, it's okay to simply stop and say, you know what, I'd like to restate that if I may, or I misspoke. Let me try that again. And most media are going to be more than willing and comfortable to let you re-answer the question, especially if it's a recorded interview or a print interview. There's plenty of opportunity to restate something that you may not have seen correctly, or if you didn't feel confident in. They're happy to do that. When you do make a mistake, we have, in all possible, avoid going into an explanation of the mistake. There's no need to explain what the mistake was or why you believe it was a mistake. Just simply acknowledging that you'd like to restate that, or I misspoke, can I answer that again, is more than enough. There's no need to explain. And as always, feel free to ask a reporter to repeat a question if you misunderstood, or even if you need a second to compose your thoughts. That's perfectly fine to say, would you mind asking that again? Or would you mind clarifying that question for me? And that might just give you a second to kind of regroup, take a breath, and then answer the question. Mm-hmm. So again, don't be afraid to use some of these things if you are in that situation. It's much better than letting a wrong statement or something that you misstated being published. You much rather have the chance or the opportunity to correct that mistake.
Mm-hmm. I'll just say, taking that pause can go for any questions. If you get asked a question that you're just have to take a minute to think about, feel free to take a pause. That's all right to do. Like Brianna said, especially during taped interviews. I know on live TV, it can seem like you have to answer right away, but even there, just take a few seconds to compose your thoughts and what you want to say. That's just fine.
Absolutely. So some tips just to make the interview go off super successful and to feel good about it. If you have time, which sometimes you do, I know the first few days of the fair can be a little crazy, but the good news is you'll have people there to help you and guide you with some of this. But if you have time, do some research on the reporter or at least the media outlet before the interview. So you know who the audience is, what they typically cover, who you're speaking to. And that will help you kind of prepare and think ahead in your mind, what questions might they ask me and how would I answer them? And then, of course, be enthusiastic during the interview and make sure you tell those brief yet compelling stories and give those personal examples. The messages are one thing, but when you can back them up with an example, a real life example of how that comes to life, that just makes the interview and the story so much stronger. Again, you can repeat your key messages within reason whenever it seems natural and comfortable. And show your passion. You're the expert. Again, this is the reason that everyone is so excited to talk to you, is because you're the expert in this area. So just always remember that and show your passion when talking to a reporter. It's okay to say, I don't know. Again, this is, media, it's a perfectly natural and normal thing to do during interview. If you don't know, and they would prefer you say you don't know too, then give them wrong information. So it's always okay to say, I don't know, and even offer to follow up and say, I can get back to you on that, especially if it's a print or recorded interview. They really appreciate that. If you say, you know, I'm not the correct person to speak to that, or I don't know the exact number, or I don't know the right answer to that, but I can get back to you, you know, within a few hours, days, you know, you can find out their deadline, but it's always okay to go that route. This next point, make your last statement count, is super important. And this is something, again, that will just get easier the more you practice. Oftentimes at the end of an interview, the reporter will ask, is there anything else you'd like to add? And that is a wide open door for you to really make that last statement count. That's a place where you can deliver what you think is your most important message, the one thing you want people to take away from your interview. That's it right there. And that happens a lot with these type of interviews, especially when it's such good news and exciting things you're talking about. You'll get asked that quite a bit. So be prepared and think ahead about, what would you say if they ask you that? What would you say in that moment? And this last one is just, you know, sort of a common sense courtesy thing. If you're running late to an interview, let the reporter know right away, and when you'll be able to join the interview, or if you need to reschedule. It's just a common courtesy thing. And again, it goes a long way in building that relationship and trust with the media. So always nice to know if something's come up, and it will from time to time, but just trying to be as accommodating as possible. Some don'ts, just some things to keep in mind as you go into interviews. Don't use jargon or buzzwords. 99% of the time you will be speaking to people who maybe don't know some of the terms that are used in dairy farming or in agriculture. Make sure you're using just common language, as if you were talking to a friend or a family member at dinner, and try and avoid that jargon or buzzwords whenever possible. Never say no comment. It's always better to say, I'm not sure, or I don't know, or, you know, I can't really answer that question, but what I can tell you is, and then your key message. When we say no comment, it is, even if it's not intended, it comes off as hiding something or being aggressive. So we just want to avoid saying that at all costs. And obviously, don't lose your cool or show negative emotion during an interview. Don't shout, cry, yell, and we know you'd never do that. But just try and keep your cool. If it does get a little heated or tense, I don't know why it would, but important to keep in mind for interviews. Never speculate or comment on a rumor or share confidential information. Again, this is a place, if you get asked something that is a rumor or the answer is very confidential, use those bridging statements. You know, I'm not here to talk about that, but what I can talk about today is this. So keep practicing and using those bridging statements, and they'll become just natural in your conversations if something like that would come up. We always like to tell people we're talking about media training is, don't ever say anything you would hate for your parents, your grandparents, your friends to read over breakfast in the morning. So, you know, kind of gets back to what Megan talked about earlier about nothing is off the record. This oftentimes is where we see these problems, is people think the interview's done and they get asked something kind of casually and something comes out that you think the interview's done, and then that's what's the headline in the paper the next morning. We want to avoid that at all costs. So just a good thing to keep in mind as you're talking to media. And again, nothing is off the record, and that's before the interview, after the interview, as you're doing small talk in the beginning, everything that you say could be used in the interview. So just always be mindful of that. So handling tough questions, if they do come up, some tips for how you can handle those. From time to time, there'll be some reporters that may ask something that is a little strays from what you're there to talk about, or might dig into something that's a little harder to answer. The first thing is to say, you're not under any obligation to answer every question a reporter asks you, but the goal is to not look or sound invasive or like you're trying to hide something. So again, that's where that no comment or worse, off the record comes in, because nothing's off the record. It's always best to say, I'm not the best person to ask regarding that topic, but I'd be happy to put you in touch with someone who is. And then if the reporter is persistent, it's okay to say, I'll get back with you more information, or, what I really came here to talk about today was what's going on in the dairy building, or my role as a dairy ambassador. And if you want to talk about that topic, we can schedule another time. And then that allows, the team that's working with you to kind of help mediate that and get the right person in touch. So, just remember, you're in control of this interview just as much, and you can use some of these tools to kind of bridge back or get back to what you're really there to talk about. And again, so like I just said, you're in control of that interview. So if you feel like you're getting off track, or you feel uncomfortable, or you're feeling really pushed into trying to say something you don't want to say, some quick tips, just be polite but firm, and just always bridge back to those key messages. And again, like I already said, it's quite okay in an interview is just if they keep coming at you to say, I'm really not here to talk about that. So if you have any more questions about my role as Princess K, or what dairy farmers are doing for sustainability, I'd be happy to talk about that. So again, it's okay to say those things if you feel like it is getting off track. So just a quick recap, that was a lot at a really high level. And I think the main things to keep in mind is just be prepared. Know what type of interview you're going into, and try and anticipate what questions you might get. And then practice, practice, practice. Use those key messages. Think about how you'd answer those questions. As Megan mentioned earlier, practice with a friend or in the mirror. And really just be yourself. Practice how you would answer those questions, being yourself and delivering those key messages. And always remember that you are the expert, and they really want to talk to you. So, so make it natural and make it your own, and share your stories.
Yeah, and I'll just add that this is a picture from 3 years ago at the State Fair when the Today Show was broadcasting live, and Princess K and the finalists were on the Today Show. So you just never know who you're talking to, but I think all these tips are relevant for any type of interviews, whether it's a small ag radio station or the Today Show. So they're relevant in all those different types of interviews.
Absolutely. Yep. So we went through that kind of all at a high level and touched on the main points. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to dig into that further or talk through any of that for you.
Yeah, and like Brianna said, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box or the chat box. One question that I have, a lot of the attendees at today's meeting and those who will be listening later are county princesses or even county coordinators. Can you talk about how you can start that connection with your local media, whether it's a newspaper or radio station? Where do you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think just, by listening and taking in the local media in your area, just, reading the newspaper, seeing who's who among the media scene, and listening into what they're talking about and how you could add to that story. So I think that's a good way to start, just to kind of do your research and get to know the media. And from there, maybe building relationships out at events, or, shooting them an email if it's anything that you want to, a particular topic that you're interested in that they're covering that you think you could add to. Most have emails listed on their websites. They're easy to track down, but I'd say, just start by listening in and taking in the local media.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, and you touched on this, Megan, just reaching out and saying, hey, I'd like to just get to know you and share a little bit about what we're doing. They're constantly on tight deadlines and looking for stories all the time to fill those papers or radio, whatever it might be. So even just knowing that you're there and a resource that you can call on is great. So it's all about relationships with the media. When they're working on something, they dip into that pocket of who they know that they could call. So it's always great to find ways to connect with them. And I think just saying, hey, I'd love to just chat with you for, a quick coffee or a 15, 20-minute Zoom and tell you a little bit about what we're doing and also hear how I can be helpful to you. That's a great way to do it.
Yeah, having that two-way street relationship is always good.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's some great advice, just to be proactive and reach out. So you are the expert. And I mean, it goes back to trust. And if I remember previous trainings, farmers are some of those #1 trusted individuals. So if we can help elevate that even more, I think that's a win-win for all of dairy.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yep.
Just thinking about, and this is maybe a personal question because I haven't done a media interview in a long time, but I remember one time when I did an interview, I kind of got really nervous at the beginning, and it was a live radio interview over the phone. And I think just maybe kind of that Minnesota niceness came out, and the interviewer asked, well, hi, Jenna, how are you today? And I'm like, oh, I'm fine. How are you? And, I was trying to be that interview. How do you just prepare yourself to be focused and laser focused? What advice do you have for some of that Minnesota niceness, which is a good thing, but at the same time, a little bit of a waste of time getting to your main points?
Yeah, no, I think, having that, hi, how are you? That's good at the beginning because it's building that relationship. There's things you can do to really ground yourself, especially when it's a phone interview. Sometimes we'll say, stand up and just take a deep breath and refocus, get your feet flat on the ground, kind of recenter while you're there. And saying, I'm great. I am really excited to talk to you about this today can sometimes just lead you right into the interview versus having that back and forth, which is still good. So, it's all about having that relationship. You want to be personable and friendly and open. So that's totally normal and natural. So there's certain things you can do to just kind of calm yourself before the interview, because I know the feeling that you're talking about, and everybody has it. So anything you can do to kind of calm yourself before is good.
Mm-hmm.
That's great advice. I will take that and stand up straight, ground myself, and yep. Absolutely, I love it. I love it. And I think too, just to talk about internalizing your key messages versus memorizing, I think that's so important, because I think we've all had that situation before where we've memorized things and suddenly forgot and have that deer in the headlight look.
Yep.
That's not a good place to be. But by internalizing those things and just kind of taking those key nuggets, I think it's really helpful just to share your key messages and your story. Because at the end of the day, as the person being interviewed, whether it's radio, TV, you are that expert. And I think that's so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And it's important to remember that a majority of the things that are gonna ask, you can anticipate. You do know what some of those basic things are, and those should be ones that are coming and that you've practiced enough. But you've also kind of thought about how you might answer some of those crazy questions you might get. And that's a good thing to practice too. We often work with people on, okay, all your common questions, but what is that one question if they asked you would freeze? What is that? And let's find an answer for that. So if it does come, worst case scenario, you know it. Or what are the 5 things that you're still, if you got asked, you wouldn't know how to answer. So have that, if you know what those are for you and you can prepare answers for them, even if you've never, ever are asked them, at least you're prepared if you do that one time. So that's always a good thing we say too, is what's that one that keeps you up at night that you just do not want to be asked? Prepare an answer for that just in case you are. And then that will also ease your mind as you're going into the interview, because you're ready for anything.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think about during election years out at the state fair, we always prepare the princesses and the finalists for the question of, well, who are you voting for this year? Or who do you support? Rarely has that question come up, but occasionally, well, even just by passersby, not even necessarily media, but just people at the fair, and we always prepare them to say, I support anyone who supports a dairy in their diet, or something very general and bridging back to the dairy messaging. So that's just one example off the top of my head that, maybe you're thinking ahead of time, like, oh, what are they going to ask me about this and things, and just finding a way to bridge it back to dairy and smoothing over the situation.
I think that's a great example. I never even would have thought about that, but it's good to know that you are preparing for some of those tough questions that maybe never will come up, but to be ready, I think that's just so important. And I see we've got a question for us. And what is the best way to practice so that you are prepared, but do not sound too rehearsed? It seems that this can be a fine line sometimes. So what are your comments on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to practicing is just it's telling a story, right? Every interview is sharing a story with someone, an audience, and sitting down and thinking through how you're going to tell that story and just practicing so much that, and saying things in different ways. So that when you're in the interview moment, it's just second nature. Again, it'd be like, think of it as if one of your friends sat down with you and said, so what are you up to? What do you even do as a dairy princess? I don't know anything about this. How would you tell them about it? And make it so second nature that you don't have to think hard about what is that one line, because you already know it. So there isn't really any like specific check the box and you'll nail this. It's just, you have to be comfortable enough with it so that it's coming off as something that is natural to you. And you may say it a little differently every time, or there may be just one way that you're really comfortable saying it and you just say it so much that it just is natural. So, I'm not sure if that's a good answer. And it's okay to have, if you're giving 5 interviews back to back and you say the exact same thing 5 times, that's okay because they're different media. And that's actually great because you're getting across your message to those 5. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. It's just, saying it enough so that when you're in the interview, it doesn't sound like you're reading it off of a piece of paper.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, if you want to kind of type out your key messages or write them down, use bullet points versus like full sentences.
Yes.
So then you have those main ideas in your head, but you can switch up how you say them or have them come out more authentically than just I think about this when so having just those key bullet points would help kind of be able to ad-lib a little bit.
And then I see, Janet, you have a question. Is it ever appropriate to end an interview? Absolutely. If it's getting aggressive or getting off topic and you've tried all of the things we talked about, bridging and saying, I'm not the best person, it is okay to say, I think we just need to and stop this interview right now. And I'd be happy to come back and revisit this, but we just need to take a break and then reschedule a time or get in touch with someone at Midwest Dairy or someone that can help you kind of revisit how you want to do that. Again, you are in control of the interview, and as long as you're being polite about it and saying, you've asked me that several times, and I'm not the appropriate person to answer that, so maybe we should just stop for today, and we can reconnect over email, or if you have other questions about what I'm here to talk about, I'd be happy to keep chatting, but I really am not going to answer your question about that today. So, just trying to be polite, but you can end an interview if they're just not hearing it and it is getting uncomfortable or aggressive. That's a great question. And it's very rare. It happens very rarely, but it is good to know what to do if for some strange reason that does happen.
Great questions from everyone. I definitely appreciate the engagement from those of you who are joining us live today. And going back to the previous question we were talking about of just practicing, I think one time too from former years, practice in a mirror, and I think Megan, you had mentioned that earlier, and even practicing with a friend like you talked about, Brianna, and also watching, I know in your slides you talked about some verbal tics. I know for me, I might say like a lot or but I know in younger years, I actually was like a hand player. So I'd play with jewelry on my hand. So I had to have nothing, like no jewelry whatsoever, just to be grounded. And I guess maybe that's another question. We use our hands to animate and really emphasize our key points, especially if we're in a live situation where we're talking to someone face to face over video, whether that be Zoom or TV. Any tips about where to put your hands, I guess, in those situations?
That's a great question. Yeah, because you don't want it to be awkward and not knowing what you're doing with it. It helps out at the state fair when 9 times out of 10, the TV interviews, they have dairy products in their hands. So that's really easy. They'll have a malt or some tea sticks or anything from the Dairy Goodness Bar. So that really helps with the what to do with my hands piece. But otherwise, we just tell people to put them at their sides or in their laps if they're sitting. Just try to, keep them as less distracting as possible. But in that case, if you are someone to talk with your hands, it's okay to do that occasionally and show off your personality, just as long as it's not super distracting. But yeah.
It's a tough one. Again, it's practicing what you're comfortable with and feels natural too. There's lots of different ways you can do that. Or, sometimes it's in the front or on your side, or holding a microphone is always
Right.
good because that keeps that one there. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great comments. I appreciate that. And one of our last comments actually from Janet is reminding everyone to assume that the camera is always on. So if you guys want to comment about that, feel free.
Yes, especially out at the state fair, you never get 100% like, hey, we're live. Like, they try to do that, but a lot of times they'll pan the audience ahead of time or anything. And so, yeah, you never really know when the camera's on or off or when you're live on TV. So again, kind of like everything's on the record, just pretend that if you're out in front and there's a camera there, it might be on. So just assume that it is versus that it isn't. If you need to straighten anything or do anything, go behind the stage and do that or kind of get out of the camera's way. But yeah, just always pretend that it's on.
And I would say the same with microphones.
Yes.
And even when you're on the phone, maybe waiting for them to come back or something, just remember, that could be recorded as well. So we've seen cases where someone's taken a deep sigh after an interview, and then that's like, and the microphone's still on. So we don't want that to happen. So as long as you are in front of the media and mic'd up or in front of the camera, just assume that you're in the interview. That's really when it starts, when you walk on the stage or walk up to the reporter.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely great advice, that the camera and microphone are always on. And even as we've been the past year utilizing technology like Zoom and Microsoft Teams more and more, it is always on, and always remember that. I think it's a very important thing. So great pointers today. And I'm not seeing, this is kind of everyone's last call for questions, but Megan and Brianna, thank you so much today for joining us and just sharing all of this information. It is just wonderful and fundamental to helping our princesses share their story with others and really helping develop that relationship with the media, and to not be afraid of them. They can be our friend, and they can really help us propel our messages and build that trust with audiences who don't know dairy. So thank you so much, and appreciate all of your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we said, it's our pleasure, and it's one of our favorite client projects to work on, and we just love it. So it's our pleasure to share this information with you all today.
Well, thank you so much. And with that, we are going to wrap up our last leadership session here. So we'll end the webinar. And remember, for everyone who is on, there will be a quick pop-up survey. So please make sure you take that and send us your feedback. We'd appreciate that. But without anything else, everyone have a great rest of your week. Thank you again, Megan and Brianna and the Belmont Partners. We appreciate it. And everyone, I hope you have a great, wonderful May the 4th. So may the 4th be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.